This will be the last video on the dynacorn Camaro, because in an hour it'll be going home. But I wanted to touch on a few things. I've had a few comments, bad body lines, blah, blah, blah. And that's fair because it's true. This car was all dynacorn, all put together. They basically prepped it. The only body work that I'm told that they did was up here, where the roof skin is welded to the quarters. So when you buy this now, you get the shell with the trunk lid and the doors on it. This one was just a shell on display in 2004 at Autorama, right? And a guy bought the car, made a deal with them. They basically gave him a deal probably or whatever on all the panels. He put it together, bunch of year one stuff, and he actually made it run and drive. The deal was actually put the panels together, don't do body work. That was an exception apparently. But we want to show that the panels right out of the box are, you know, pretty decent. That was the whole point of this. So he went ahead and built the whole car, and so it was built in haste. No body work was done, little dents, little dings, nothing was fixed. So I'm going to show you, because I don't have another, I do have a 69 here, but it's a bucket. It's got quarter work, and you know, it's nowhere near original. But I do have this, and I know the history of this car. I know the last couple owners. It was a very original car. They got a bit of work down there on both sides, and then the car was repainted. And it was a repaint, like it wasn't a huge job or a resto. They put primer over the old nasty green. They painted the car white. This is a very original car. So what I'm going to show you, I tried to explain this in the other videos, but I don't think that was fair or enough. And I didn't really review the cars, what dynacorn could do. Now, the first thing to note, the body was a prototype, and then they started making them. So I'm going to assume that they've gotten a little better. And even if they haven't, that's probably okay. But I'm going to show you what's wrong with the car. All the aftermarket trunk lids, including dynacorn, the trunk lid goes almost straight down. Let me show you both sides. When you look at the car, see that hard angle? And they did it on both sides. And the way they did some things, I'm sure they had to compromise to make things work and so on and so forth, and that's okay. So let's go look at the original car. And I know this car, I mean, the trunk might have been moved around or whatever, but it's never really been messed with. So what do we got here? Much less of an angle on the quarter, little bit of an angle on the trunk lid. Now, I think that is how it should be from the factory. To be fair, we'll go over here and look at that. The trunk lid here comes almost straight down. There's a chunk of metal that's stuck out. That's not a paint blister. That's hard to get focus on it. But yeah, the metal is folded over there, not as nicely. But anyway, and then there's a little bit less of an angle there. So, I mean, to fix that, you just knock the edge of the trunk lid to mimic that and call it a day. And now that I see that, I'm actually going to hammer that in, prime the corner. When I paint the car, it'll match like the other side. So, let's go with this whole narrative that dynacorn sucks because they didn't match that back there, right? And if that's what you're thinking, that's fine. Honestly, now that I see that, and had this car been in my shop and been mocked up, I'd have fixed both of those problems. You could massage the fender in a little bit, shave the edge of the trunk and fix it. Okay, so that's one difference. And I'm trying to be fair. I think dynacorn did a great job because, let's face it, they're reproducing bodies of cars. You can still find these in the junkyard, but there's nothing left. And if you've got a papered car, or even if you want to do it as a what they call a one-off, this gives you something to work with. You know, you can build your dream car even though you can't find it. And if you want one that's new underneath, this is not $100,000 built. So it could be, but it doesn't have to be. I think dynacorn did a good enough job. A guy with a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of metalworking skills, watch a lot of videos and learn them, you could probably handle this. That's what I'm saying. So I showed you those. I'm going to show you what I think is the worst thing that drove me nuts. Right here, you can see that line. It's really hard to catch it on camera. but there's basically right here on these cars, they tend to pucker out, but this, it's almost like a reverse dent right here. So that kind of sucks. And I see that when I walk around the car, which is why it bugs me. Where here, there's nothing here, but right here, there's a high spot here where it kind of tips out a bit. You know, when they press the panel or whatever, that happens. I do admit this one's bad. I don't like it. Okay, so when I come to this car, nothing this way, real smooth. When I go across here, up here where we didn't sand, there's a little bit of an out, nowhere near as bad. Now on this side, I can't see it even in the light, even when it's shiny. I can kind of feel a little dimple right here ahead of where the bend would be. This way though, it's like smooth, smooth, smooth. Nothing wrong on this car there. So I guess dynacorn messed up, and you know, you should never ever build a dynacorn car like that because of that. No, I'm not saying that. You heat that up, cool it down, it'll suck it right in. That should have been done before that car was painted. And I'm not knocking it because that car was to show off what they could do, not cheating by fixing the whole car, right? That was sort of the deal with this car. Okay, so let me show you a couple other things. This is just a quick video, and I'm a little bit hyper because car's leaving soon, and I really wanted to get this video. Just to be fair, there's things I missed. When you come up here, that's not 100% perfect. Look, I'm going to save us some time. Neither is that one. All right, body lines. So the car came to me because when they built this car to display the car, it was put together very quickly. They painted the car because it had to be built between one show season, 04, and then be all put together and come back for the 05 shows, like 4 or 5 shows all over New York and Toronto, Canada, and I don't know where else. But the body lines are okay-ish. You know, you see the door's a touch low, but I mean, there's really not much we can do with that. And the reason it's a touch low is because up here, it looks like it'd be a touch high. So all I wanted to do for the customer, and this is what he asked me to do, set the doors, set the whole front end so that things can open and close without rubbing and chipping more paint off. Now, worst thing on this car is right here. I think this door is up a little bit more than it should be. I know for a fact this fender dips down here more. When you would have mocked this up, you could have easily fixed that. Again, the whole entire car is aftermarket. And get this, the guy who put this car together, not a body man, not a guy that's in a shop, not a professional. A guy bought this car and put it together himself. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to give him that. When the body shop got it to prep it, prime it, and paint it, they were told to not worry about too much of that. Now, I'm sure they moved things around a little bit, but they didn't go crazy either. Now, this fitment is really bad. You know, and again, this is just an opinion. It could be fixed. This side, not nearly as bad, but you can still see the bigger gap up there. But if you look at this side, you know, the body line's fair. This body line is almost fair, but if I come up here, it's almost like the fender could slightly tip out. Okay, fair enough. I'm not going to worry too much about it, but you do have that big gap there. Now, this door is actually sitting with the quarter set properly. Now, one thing that was wrong with this car, the far door was out further. This door was in too far. The whole entire front end was shifted over, and everything was a little bit out of whack. So what I had to do was bring that door in almost 1/4 of an inch, adjust this one out to suit the cowl. They had put at the shop this here tight, not realizing there should be a gap on this car because you want to have enough of a gap around the hood that you're okay. So let's get a quick shot of that gap on the door. Kind of grows and gets bigger at the top. A little better, not great. Now this door can be adjusted a touch, and when I do, everything will be better, except that gap is going to grow a little bit more. look, it's just the way they stamp panels and how things go, right? You could Bondo the hell out of it and smooth it out, and that's fine. This side's worse. However, on this side, the whole gap is worse. But on this side, if you look at the bottom back there, door's in. At the top, it's slightly out. This side needs pins. So once I do that, it'll pull the door in some, but we're also going to adjust it a little bit. The other side, we're leaving alone. So that gap will get better. Now, Dynacorn, I guess, kind of messed that up. They didn't make it perfect, and they should be ashamed of themselves. No, not at all. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're a bodywork guy at all, you're going to fix that. I mean, what they could have done is made it absolutely perfect and pristine. This car was originally, I think they were sold, when you look online, for like 13, 14 grand. They might be a little more now for the shell with the doors and trunk lid. So maybe you want to pay $25,000 and they make everything absolutely. But look, what are they going to go by? OEM? You can't go by OEM. These cars aren't perfect. They never were. They were made to be cheap and compete with the cheap Mustang, right? And I'm not knocking these cars or the Mustang. I'm saying these were little price point cars to get people with a very little money into a cool V8 car. You know, the people who couldn't afford the big luxury cars and, you know, and so on, right? So, and I love these cars. I'm not knocking them at all. But that's some of the stuff you're going to see. Now, another thing that you're going to see with aftermarket, especially with hoods, they always tend to make this sharper than it should be. But you can dolly this in by hammering it slightly down and recurve this to fit better. Not to say that this isn't off too, but at the end of the day, when you put all the parts together, you got to kind of make things work. You can't just bolt it together as they did with this one. I mean, you can, but it won't be perfect. If you want it perfect, you got to work that. More importantly, the sharp corners, sometimes I'll slice them, knock them in, and weld them round. But anyway, sorry about that. I had a little bit of a technical glitch and I had to pause it and continue. Anyway, that's a thing, right? So when you come up here, you see that little point is protruding, right? That should have been fitted, knocked in a little bit. That should have been worked. So look, you got to expect to do some of this little stuff as you're building a car like this. If you're building an old original, it's banged up, it's rusty, parts have been welded in, you're going to do all that anyway. You can knock dynacorn all you want, and some people will. And look, if I have a car and I can reskin the door and stuff like that and use original parts, I do. Because I think it's kind of cool to say that, and I know people like that. And sometimes the stuff does fit really well. Sometimes you take original doors off one, say, Dodge Dart, put it on another Dodge Dart, same year, they don't fit. Same thing with the hood and whatnot. Funny thing how that works out, and that happens a lot. So as far as body lines being awesome, not awesome, and look, when I do body work, I replane everything, so everything is straight, even if it's a weird paint job. But yeah, that's the way I like to do it. But we're not going to repaint this whole car because of that. It's got really cool paint on it. This is going to be his, you know, drive around, do some burnouts, go to local car shows car. So all we did, we realigned the front end over to where it should be, and the doors. I do think this door may have a bit of a twist, but it could be that the back of the fender is slightly in. But whatever it was, at this point he can drive it and use the car. We're happy. There's a few little dings and dents that aren't really major. Over the winter, we're going to have the paintless dent guy come out. I got a guy who's really good at that. He's going to fix that. And there's a few other things too. I'm sure people have seen the other videos and saw how that was a little higher, and I think I talked about it. There's two little bolts. The owner can reach under there, pull the grill out and twist that and tighten it back in. But the main thing, we got a pretty fair gap, and it's not awesome, but it's pretty fair for any 60s car. So I don't like right there, but we have to live with it because we're not repainting the car. And I mean, you could gain some gap there and pull it out, but then that down there comes out with it, right? So you got to learn to live with what you're going to live with. But anyway, listen, it is what it is. I would buy a dynacorn complete setup any day of the week. The little bit of metal work it needs to be perfect is not much. Let's hit this real quick. These always sit high. Not as high, still sits high. Every time I've changed a trunk lid, even if it's an original off another car, off the same car, it's weird to me that they always sit high. The cheaper aftermarket ones also sit high, but they sit even higher. I'll put a couple of heavy pillows or a sandbag, and I'll just gently kind of tweak both sides and keep moving the bag back and forth until it fits as good as we can get it. And I've had some that fit super good. But you see the curve, it never quite matches this because they're all stamped differently. I'm just trying to be fair to not miss anything. Definitely better. The curve especially. I've worked on a lot of these, they're not all better, but this is definitely, even when I hold it down, like it's high. And you don't really notice it walking around the car when the car's all one color, but since I sanded it, you really notice it. And again, it's not that bad. Can you play with the holes and adjust them more? Sure, I'm not doing that. This car is pretty nice and pretty clean. You know, this car is like if a nice car came out OEM and you happen to have one that wasn't all twisted up and nice. So it is what it is. But, so there you have it. That's my thoughts. OEM, I mean, the 60s, they didn't really care. Nobody did body lines the way we think of them now. Like when I look down that door, I can see a little bit of a squiggle through that whole body line. Could that be from where they sanded it and repainted it? Maybe, but you know, what I like to do is put a bit of fill on those, and then I run tape, and after everything's set, I'll block it to suit, and it'll be razor straight. And I'll tell you what, that does make a car look a million times better than it actually is. That being said, this is probably the way this thing came original, and I'm totally fine with that and don't care. Some people will. They complain about the body lines and the gaps and everything else. I'm one of the few guys. I shouldn't say that. There's other guys doing it too, but a lot of guys don't deal with too much of that if they can get a car together. Like I go to car shows and I see what's out there. I know what's out there. Things aren't always what they seem, but quite frankly, look, there's a point where you got to stop and say, is it good? Is it good enough? This is how it would have been original with a different color on it. I mean, I think that's okay. Absolutely nothing wrong with this car the way it is. We'll touch up a few of the spots later on down the road to save this cool paint job. But look, I mean, you should be able to look at this and be like, hey, man, that's not bad for a whole entire aftermarket car. Because, I mean, come on. I think Dynacorn hit it out of the park. It's a way to buy an old turd out of some field and you realize the frame's bad, the floors are bad. You start getting into the inner structure, you cut the quarters off and you realize everything in there is rotten, the roof is rotten. At what point, what, 13, 14,000 US versus how long would it take you to put panels and panels? You're going to build your own aftermarket. And even if you do it in a factory, these guys got a jig, they can reproduce this quality, which is pretty good. Not amazing, but pretty good. The guy in the shop, restoration, maybe he hits that out of the park, maybe he doesn't, maybe it's square, maybe it ain't. And if he's really good, he'll fix it. So it doesn't really matter. The point is, probably going to cost you more to do that, to get to that level. And the thing is, most of the cars, because they'll compromise a little bit with the bottom, under the car will never look brand new. When you put this car, the Dynacorn car, on a hoist, this car looks like a brand new car underneath, and that you can't duplicate that without like insane amounts of money. So in my opinion, is this as cool as original as a 69 Camaro SS all original car that somehow made it through its life and stayed pristine without 4 body jobs? Probably not. But if you want a really nice, clean, all new hardware, clean car that looks like this, Dynacorn's the way to go. There's nothing wrong with this. And look, I'm talking about aftermarket and Dynacorn, but realistically, AMD, I've had good panels. I've had some that were shaky. I consider them all good because, quite frankly, these companies are making parts to save cars. I did that Roadrunner, and I did confirm that the rear quarters on the Roadrunner, sorry, the Sports Satellite, they were all wavy and machine worked. They were AMDs, but they weren't complete quarters. They were 80%ers. So it is what it is. Put a set of good mark fenders on a 68 car like that one last year. There's videos on that. They were actually pretty nice. There was almost no waves in them, but like back here wasn't finished out nice. And we basically installed it by putting it together up here. Can't remember now, but either way, they turned out just fine. So, of course, I had to body work them. I had to cut the car in half and body work it anyway, so it didn't matter. My point is, this is cool. Anyway, that's enough for today. Cheers.